Welcome to Getting Started with an Indication. Before you introduce your dog to a target odor, you should create a solid indication behavior. In dog training, we talk a lot about getting behaviors consistently before we try and put them on cue. This way, the dog has a clear idea of the behavior before we start calling it something. When we do give a cue, we can reliably get the dog to do the desired behavior. This way, it's easy for the dog to understand that when they perceive the cue, they then perform the desired behavior. You always want the order to be cue, behavior, reward. If you repeat a cue over and over again and the dog doesn't perform the desired behavior, it can become confusing what the cue really means. In Nosework, the target odor is a cue for your dog to perform an indication behavior. So instead of a verbal or visual cue, we are teaching the dog a scent cue. Training a solid indication behavior before introducing your dog to odor makes it really clear to the dog what they are supposed to do when they do eventually find odor. There are many different types of indications, and there are pros and cons to different indications. The most common is what's called a nose at source indication, which we will be focusing on in this program. Having your dog freeze with their nose at the hide is a very clear indication to the handler. It's non-destructive, and it's flexible for both high and low hides. This indication also makes it very clear exactly where the source of odor is. In some competitions, you may be asked to point to where the hide is, and must point within a few inches of the hide. It's also important that your indication is non-destructive so your dog doesn't destroy and/or displace the hide. If you're dealing with vehicle searches, you don't want your dog to damage the vehicle. To teach a nose at source indication, we will use a target plate and teach a nose touch behavior. If your dog is already familiar with nose targeting, this will be a very quick process. If your dog is not familiar with nose targeting, it's a pretty simple behavior to teach. The best target plates are old margarine, sour cream, or yogurt lids. Most people have these laying around the house, and they're cheap. Start with the target plate in your hand and present it close to your dog's nose. Wait for your dog to touch their nose to the target plate, mark with a yes or a click, and reward your dog by placing a treat on the target plate. Repeat this a few times. Once your dog is confidently touching the target plate with their nose, start mixing up where and how you present the target to your dog, including presenting the target plate further away from their nose. Try placing the target plate closer to the ground until it is on the floor and no longer in your hand. If your dog tries to paw the target, don't reward and represent the target a little higher or closer to their nose. Pawing is an undesirable indication because it can be destructive. If your dog attempts to bite the target plate, try to present the plate more in the palm of your hand so it's not as easy to grab with their mouth. Try not to use any verbal cue to tell your dog to touch the target plate. The sight of the plate should be the cue for your dog to touch their nose to the target. This will make it easier for your dog to transition to having the target odor being the cue to do the indication. That's it for this lesson. Because we're not using odor yet, it's okay for your dog to make a few mistakes, and there will be some troubleshooting. Make sure you're trying your best to set your dog up to do a correct indication behavior on the target plate, but it's not a huge deal at this point if they make some mistakes like pawing or biting at the target plate. Above all else, make sure you're having fun with your dog and keeping a high rate of reinforcement.